All right, so here we are. We are in Cleveland, Ohio. We are with the world's number one marketing authority, Dan Kennedy. We spent the day talking about the big event that we've got coming up in July, the 8th and 9th here in Cleveland. With Dan, we're going to be talking about two specific things to do with success in life and business. Number one is 0 to million. How do you get from 0 to million? What does that millionaire mindset look like? And very importantly for a private practice, if you're a physical therapist watching this, the burning question is, what does the future of PT look like? How do we navigate the choppiness, if you like, of being in an insurance practice that's stuck on relying on referrals from doctors to getting towards a cash pay model, much more lucrative. And we're going to ask Dan, we're going to pick his brains, we're going to have a good discussion. What does the future look like? That's what everybody wants to know, Dan. What do you think?
So the future often looks somewhat like the past because we keep repeating business cycles and economic cycles and mistakes, over and over and over again. I've been working with private practice owners since the late 1970s, more chiropractic and dental than PT, but PT as well.
Yeah.
I had a very large private client physical therapy clinics in Kentucky in the mid 1980s. I was in chiropractic in the late 70s and early 80s. I was one of 4 or 5 kind of leading both the prepay movement versus pay per visit and the cash practice movement, because they stitch together. You can't do one without the other. And the problems of being the second class citizen in the care equation and being dependent on some entity, someone else to hand you your patients, your customers. It was a dangerous evil then. It's a dangerous evil now. The chiropractors really never faced it because up until fairly recently, the medical community and the chiropractic community would just have nothing to do with each other. So it actually prevented them from finding themselves in the same position that the physical therapy profession finds itself in. But the insurance problem was just as real. And overarchingly, if you look at what has been a very slow evolution in healthcare, and evolutions tend to become revolutions at some point. They creep and creep and creep, and then by some reason, mechanism, means they suddenly accelerate. This has been a move to consolidation and big business, not small business. I recommended a book to you today by Carol Roth called The War on Small Business. And it's well worth reading. It's not comprehensive, by the way, but it's well worth reading because there is a determined effort, a deliberate effort for there to be big business, not small business. Yeah. Government prefers it. Socialist government has to have it. Yeah. And anytime the government is paying a large portion of the bills, they want it because they feel like it's easier to control. So it's happened in the small manufacturing business. It's happening in banks. During the Obama administration, there was a reduction of both startups and existent local community and regional banks. They deliberately made the regulatory environment compliance costs so high that those banks consolidated. And there was a lot of pressure on the family-owned bank in the community with 5 branches to sell, because the compliance costs for B of A, they can absorb almost anything. But so there was a lot of that. Then it kind of eased up again. And there were a fair number of bank startups during the Trump years. And now we just had this little banking crisis, which probably hides a bigger banking crisis. And there's a big open discussion. Even people who should know better, like Kevin O'Leary from Shark Tank, are openly saying, what do we need regional banks for anyway?
Yeah.
Right? Everybody banks digitally, which everybody doesn't, but everybody banks digitally. If we just have 5 big banks, we don't have to worry about them failing. Gee, we've forgotten Lehman Brothers. We don't have to worry about them failing. And so why don't we just eliminate all the small banks altogether and have like 5 big banks? So that's in healthcare.
Yeah.
It's very much in healthcare. Okay? And insurance is often intertwined with it and being used to enforce it. So in pharmacy industry, the independent pharmacy is fighting for their life because Aetna owns pharmacy benefit management companies, and I think they own a big hunk of CVS, if I'm not mistaken, or it's the other way around. But the insurers and the deliverers are becoming one, and fewer of them. And that's not an accident. So, like here in this area, we have Cleveland Clinic and we have University Hospitals, the 2 big systems. And we had, in and around Cleveland, the first ring of suburbs and the second ring of semi-rural suburbs. We had a lot of small regional hospitals. We had a ton of independent healthcare practices of every kind, eye, back, PT, whatever. And over the last handful of years, Cleveland Clinic primarily, University secondarily, have bought everything.
Yep.
I mean, the consolidation is stunning.
Yep.
They can't make signs that say Cleveland Clinic fast enough. Okay? And that is not an accident. It is part of a trend. Okay? And PT is very vulnerable because they have already depended on doctors to hand them their patient. And as those doctors get consolidated and owned by a few big entities, those entities are not going to want to leave the next level of care to a bunch of independent providers running around loose. No, naturally, you'll want to consolidate them too. In the meantime, if you've been getting referrals from Dr. Smith, Jones, and Harris, and Dr. Smith retires and Dr. Jones and Harris become serfs of the Cleveland Clinic system, guess what? You're not getting any referrals from those guys anymore.
Yeah.
They can't, even if they wanted to. So you should not sleep well at night if you are, the worst number in business anyway is 1, period, 1 of anything.
Yeah.
And so if predominantly you have one source of customers, clients, or in this case, patients, it doesn't matter what that one source is, by the way, but if that source is referrals from these 5 doctors who we drop candy off for and we take to a golf tournament once a year, etc., you ought not sleep well at night because you could have 0 sources like on Monday.
Yeah.
And that's a very real thing. Now, what happens when a lot of independent competing deliverers get crushed into a few is there's a big percentage of the population who goes along. They say, well, okay, that's the way it is. If I got to stand in line, if I got to be on the phone for 6 hours before I can get to a human being, I'll just be on the phone for 6 hours until I can get to a human being. But there's also a significant, not as big, but a significant and typically more affluent percentage of the population who resists.
Yep.
Says, no, I do not want to be part of that monolithic, bureaucratic, uncaring, non-marketing thing where people snarl at me and hit me in the head with a clipboard and tell me to fill out a form, go sit in the corner by the pot. I don't want to be part of that.
Yep.
And I have the means to buy other, and I will buy other, right? So private aviation has thrived, has commercial aviation, has become 5 companies, and they're all shitty, right? I mean, some people are afraid of reference. I started flying commercially in 1974, first class. And when you flew first class in 1974, they held everybody else back. They brought you on board. Everybody was happy. They helped stuff your luggage into the overhead bins, and by God, it was going to fit. And they got you a drink and a snack before they even let the coach passengers on. And on long flights, there was like one flight attendant for every row. They sat down, they played cards with you. There were magazines, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we all know, right? How was your flight now? Your last flight you took? It was horrible, right? Yeah. So people with the financial ability to do it, who still feel like maybe they're paying obscene prices and would rather, if they could fly first class commercial and be treated well, have moved to private aviation. And organized companies like Wheels Up have thrived. Leasing companies have thrived. The private aviation terminals where you used to, when I started flying private 15 years ago, there'd be, 2 or 3 people, but there wouldn't be packed. It's packed. I mean, packed. So there's this segment of society that says to itself, wait a minute.
Yeah.
I can afford to be treated better, and I will find a way to be treated better. And you have this incredible separation that happens. And it is happening, and it is going to happen here. So there will be independence, truly independent private practices, PT practices, that not only survive this, but prosper from it. And there will be a bigger number who will be eaten by it, and will just disappear into it. And there will be another number who will be out. If they're of the age to retire early, which is something that's happened in dentistry, they'll retire early. Or they're just going to get squeezed to the point they can't make a living.
Yeah.
Because part of this scheme, the insurers keep reducing reimbursements, but costs keep going up, right? Right now, because of the labor shortage, your labor costs have gone up because you either got to pay more to retain them or you got to pay more to get them. Yeah. We know with PT, there's big signing bonuses in certain areas.
Yep.
Just here's $5,000.
Yep.
Just come to work. Okay. Your supply costs are going. Every cost is going up, right? But your reimbursements are going down. So they will literally squeeze some right out of the business. All right. So you get to decide which of these three groups you want to be in. You actually have the choice. That choice is available, and that choice is yours.
I feel like that's something that isn't spoken about enough in private practice. A lot of people just think that their challenge is to get more patients. So their idea is often, how do I get more patients? How do I get more patients? But because they're trapped inside an insurance model, actually one of the biggest challenges is becoming, how do I get a PT? Because the independent,
of course,
cannot afford the extra 15, 20,000, because often the doctor or the bigger hospital-based systems, they're not only at an advantage of getting referrals, they're also getting paid more as a result of it.
So, of course. So you become now a victim of volume.
Yeah.
Right? And so there's a number of answers to this, but ultimately the big answer is more from fewer and less.
Yeah.
So the winning strategy, if you want to be in the independent group, is more from fewer and less. That means you get more income from fewer units of business,
Yeah.
requiring less overhead. You don't get yourself trapped in the opposite, because the opposite is deadly. Okay? Now, a lot of businesses, healthcare and otherwise, they solve this by merely reorienting who they promote themselves to, who they make themselves for. Plug a book. I have a book called No BS Guide to Marketing to the Affluent. And so they'll solve this conundrum purely by that.
Yep.
Right? Others will solve it by what I call business within a business, or bolt-on business. So they'll have a business that is not as price or fee sensitive as is their core deliverable, that people do not necessarily expect insurance to pay for, and because of its benefit and importance to them,
like what we were talking about today, stretch therapy,
are willing to pay cash for.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So businesses will, figure that out. There's even businesses that don't have the insurance issue.
Yeah.
They will figure out. So the neighborhood restaurant, where price is not very elastic, right? Our neighborhood restaurant that we go to a lot. It's a mid-range, mid-price Italian restaurant. Price is not all that elastic. There's competition.
Yeah.
People pay a little more for a better pizza, but not a lot more. And if you start getting volume, bingo, you need more people. There's no people to get, et cetera, et cetera. So, for example, they've gotten really good at about once every 4 to 6 weeks, the big wine tasting dinner with 8 courses, each one about this big, and the wine expert from this winery or that brand who's there to tell the story of the wine served with each course, right? And price is out the window. Okay? It's out the window.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't directly compare to, I could go eat at Olive Garden, right? There's no direct comparison. There's a social element to it, wine lovers meet wine lovers. Okay, so Carla's gone to the last two, for example. I don't go. Number one, I don't drink, and number two, I'm not social. Okay, okay. She's a wine aficionado. She even owns a little piece of a winery, and she likes to socialize. And here's a place where there's a social element, but for them, they're booking their entire back room with price elastic, a bolt-on business, right? So even where there's no insurance involved, businesses have, this is one of the ways they can change their value per customer and make more money from the same number of customers.
Yeah.
Okay? And so when the insurance is involved, if you're too addicted to it to walk away from it, okay, or you've got enough obligations that you have to do that as a transition rather than a jump, right? And so you leave the office at 4:30 saying to yourself, by God, by Monday but you talk yourself out of it by the time you get home, or your spouse does because you got 3 kids in college, right? Okay, if you have to do it as a transition, okay, then you do it with the bolt-on business that has synergy, right? And that you honestly believe in its value, so it has synergy and it has integrity, and it's cash, okay? And by synergy, I mean that your main practice can direct some patients to it as well. And if you front end market it can direct some patients to your other practice. Now, if you play the game really well over time and not ages, okay, you get one bolt-on business working, you get a second one working. Before long, you can't afford to convert the whole practice to cash. The other big thing about all of it is he who brings in the customer is almost always he who makes the most money. He's the highest paid person in the equation, right? Even today, but certainly in the past years in Hollywood, it's not the best actor that makes the most money. It's the actor that draws the most fans to the movies, right? So like in his 2 decades of being number one at the box office, few people would ever argue that Burt Reynolds was the best actor. But you put Burt Reynolds in a movie, you had a hit. So bingo, right? He who brings in the money. In my sport, in racing, see, horse racing has become a welfare recipient dependent of the casino industry, right? And it's a very bad position. It's as bad a position to be in as getting all your patients from a doctor. The racing industry is literally in the same position. And so the minute that the casino industry can figure out how to get rid of them, they will. They needed them to open up regional casinos. But as soon as they can get rid of them, they're going to get rid of them. Their days are numbered, right? Now, if they were bringing in customers in big numbers through their own marketing, the casino industry would have a different attitude toward them, right? For a time, Vince McMahon, I had a client, the Ultimate Warrior from the Wrestling Federation. And he was right around the time that the old studio model that Vince was using cracked and broke. Because when the wrestlers were not doing anything on their own to create and bring in and keep fans. Their attitude was, we just show up and put on the show. Filling the arena is your job. They were interchangeable and dispensable.
Yeah, interesting.
And they all got the smallest piece of the pie.
Yeah.
Right? When they figured out, it started with Hulk Hogan, when they figured out, if we can control the customer, and the customer comes through us to get into the arena, the whole financial equation here is going to change.
Yeah.
And we're going to be able to get some of the merchandising rights money.
Yeah.
And we're going to get some of the TV money. And we're going to write. And that's exactly what happened, by the way. The entire mathematical equation of the wrestling industry changed largely thanks to Hulk Hogan.
Yeah.
Right? Because he who controls the customer is
So he just became a marketer then, basically.
Of course.
Yeah, exactly.
Of course.
Yeah.
So when you bring your own, can I use the word customer?
Yeah.
When you bring your own customer in through the door,
Yeah.
you're the one with all the power.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you need somebody else to deliver your customer, right? So if you have a store in a mall, right, the mall gets to dictate to you the hours you're open, when you can have a sale, what you can put out in front of your store, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, because they're providing the customers. When you have what's called in retail a destination store that you attract people to, A, you can do whatever you want, right? Because you control all sides of that equation. B, nobody can screw with you.
Yep.
In the mall, they can let a competitor have a store right across from you, right? They put kiosks in at Christmas that compete with you. They can't, right? But when you're bringing in the customer, right?
Yeah.
So you can't have business security if you aren't your market maker. Okay? And the less that's true, the less security you have.
Everything you've said, I've been writing down some things. Second-class citizen, how to avoid being one in healthcare. Affluent, as in those are the folks that are going to say, I don't want to be part of this big kind of mothballed, conglomerate, if you like, everybody brought together, one size fits all system. And then the difference between the independent and successful, or the kind of bought up and out, stuck, working every hour God sends to try and keep up with Medicare or Pfizer or whoever's latest setback, cutback, whatever you want to call it. All of those three things, even the story with Hulk Hogan, the WWF, whether it's the star in the mall at Christmas, everything has one differentiator, which is marketing.
Yeah, absolutely.
The ability to market.
Absolutely. And if you are either marketing averse or marketing inept, then you are at a huge financial disadvantage. See, when people, and again, I've worked with the professionals for, not exclusively, but a lot for a long time. And when you go to school and you spend however many years in school you spend in order to get this technical or clinical skill set, it is understandable that you think that's the Holy Grail, right? And of course, you were sold that when you picked a career and went to school for it, too. So professionals think that that's the Holy Grail. And if I'm doing something meaningful and important, with a high level of clinical or technical skill, that ought to be enough, right? If I'm healing the sick, and they can throw away their walkers and play the piano again, and right, that ought to be enough, right? And there was a day when it was, but it was right around 1940, where mostly there was one barber, one family doctor, one hardware store, one whatever, and if you hung up the sign, you won, right? And right around 1950 to 1955, that started to change dramatically, right? And of course, now it is not true at all. We have no need hardly anywhere for another anything. You know, they've used up all the places to open a Starbucks, so they're now opening Starbucks in the restrooms of Starbucks. That's what they're down to. So, like, we don't need another coffee shop. So you can't be just another alternative, right, in any field. And the argument that you're clinically better than the other guy is not good enough, because nobody can tell, at least until they've had 16 treatments, right? Because there's no consumer split test, right? I can't come to you on Tuesday and go to him on Thursday and evaluate, right? So those claims are just the ante to be in the game, okay? And the clinical and the technical is just the ante to be in the game, right? Then it's the ability to do all of the things that we kind of lump under the umbrella of marketing, right? It's the ability to figure out who you want to be for, who you want to attract. And the worst answer in the world is anybody and everybody. So what is my, service orientation? Who is my consumer? Who's my avatar? Who do I want to be here, right? Like, I teach people to figure out a 5 list all the time of the 5 things, in this case, that would be true about a patient for your practice that would make them a slam dunk. If somebody had 3 of those 5 and they come in the door and they get a presentation from you, they're a slam dunk. They're in. And then you got to go after people that match up with that hand, right? And you got to deliberately repel a bunch of people that don't match up with that hand. They may be fine as somebody else's patient, but they don't fit you. And they're just going to clog up your system and raise your overhead and cause you staff problems and all of that. So that has to be done. Then you got to make sure you've made yourself a true match to that market in every congruent way possible, right? And then you've got to be able to find them, reach them, and communicate effectively with them your story. Then you need a process for they raise their hand, they get communicated with, they come in, right? So all of that is marketing stuff, right? It's not clinical stuff. I used the example. I have a friend and a client who is what you are to physical therapy practice owners, he is to pastors. Okay? And he hates it when I call it the church business, but they're in the church business. Okay? And I don't mean that,
I love it.
And so he has this mindset problem with his folks on steroids, right? That if I do an excellent job, right, the equivalent of if I heal them and they can walk again, and, you know, their bowels work and they can play the piano, but that ought to be enough, right? His guys have that plus we're God's salesmen. We're delivering God. So he ought to fill the church, right? That ought to be enough, right? Great sermon, nice environment, concern and empathy for the sick, weddings, funerals, Christmas concert, make sure we got enough Bibles and hymnals for everybody that comes on Sunday, and we got eternal salvation. That ought to be enough.
Yeah.
The church should be full, right? And there's a huge number of failing and failed churches because the pastor can't get past that and understand that he's actually in the marketing business and his deliverable is church.
Yeah.
And when you confuse your deliverable with your business, you're usually in serious trouble, right? So they've got to do all the same marketing
Doesn't matter what
stuff
business.
that I just described, right? And they have to be very thorough and detailed and, you know, micro about it. And any part of it that they're not going to do, they have to get some competent agency or service provider, you know, or group to do it for them, right? But they have to know enough that they're the captain of that whole process. You can't just, you know, social media people, you know, just social media experts, you know, are like, you know, fleas, and anybody can call themselves one, right? And if you don't know enough to tell one from the other, you're going to spend a lot of money on social media that it looks okay, but it doesn't do anything. You know, I owned classic cars for a long time. As you know, I'm blind in one eye and I can't drive a car now, but I owned classic cars for a long time. And very often, at least for a period of time, they looked great, but they wouldn't run.
Yeah.
You know, they were not dependable. They might get you there, but they might not get you home, you know. And so people, and I don't know anything about cars. I watched Jay Leno one night when he was still hosting the Tonight Show. I can't forget who the guest was, but the guest said, I'd like to have a bunch of classic cars like you do, right? And Jay said, do you know how to work on cars? And the guy said, no, I don't know. Then Jay says, you don't want any classic cars. He said, because they're old, they break, they don't run, they don't work. And you either got to be able to fix them yourself, or you got to know enough that whoever you're having fix them for you isn't robbing you blind and still leaving you stranded and you can't get home.
Yeah.
Right? And so you need to be a student of marketing, even if you're not going to do all of it for yourself. And you need to understand that, like it or not, that's what creates the income. Sorry, I should have unplugged it before we started doing video. That's where the wealth comes from, not actually from the core deliverable. Yeah. It's the marketing of the core deliverable that is everything.
Dan, amazing. Cannot wait for the session. I'm going to ask you one last question. before we go, we've got to get to a flight to Orlando. What would be, so we're going to split the day up into two things. We're going to talk more about private practice and marketing and getting towards more cash pay, away from insurance. We're going to talk about all of these things. We're going to spend as well a few hours talking about the thing that you really shaped me when I first met you was the mindset of somebody that was, whether we want to call it millionaire, rich, wealthy, successful, whatever. My favorite thing is that independence, that autonomy to live your life. What's the one thing that keeps people stuck from ever getting to that type of life, do you think? There's millions of business owners, but very few of them are living the type of life that they want. What do you think it is?
So there's never a good one thing answer. Yeah. I hate the question. No offense. But a big one is that they are in their own way psycho-emotionally.
Yeah.
People have really bad relationships with money. And a lot of it is, what did they hear at the top of the stairs when they were 8? Conditioning, then reinforced by experience. Everything from actual practical financial illiteracy, yeah, which unfortunately our country is overrun with, to all this psycho-emotional stuff. Right? And if you don't understand that, and you don't, like, if you have it, you don't do something to change it, yeah, and replace it, it's like dragging weights behind you in a marathon race. Everybody else is running free, and you've got 150 pounds of weight tied to your belt that you're dragging down the road, right? And so that's one part of the equation, I think. Another part of the equation is that people don't understand, they don't know actually why money moves from person to person, place to place, and how to be in sync with that rather than in conflict, yeah, with that. And that includes what we were just talking about, is the idea that, gee, if I'm really good at what I do, yeah, that should be enough, right?
Because that's what I was told.
And they think that's why money, but it's not. Yeah. It's just not. It's not how money works. So there's a practical understanding of the truth about why money moves. It's always in motion, by the way. And there's no shortage of it, despite what some politics may claim for reasons of its own. Walt was right. There's no shortage of money. There's just a shortage of imagination and initiative. Right? And no shortage of money. But there's a lot of misunderstanding about its rules, why it does this, why it does that, right? So, like, if you're going to play pool, billiards, this is a mini billiards table. If you're going to play billiards at a competitive level, you have to really actually understand physics, right? Because shooting pool is about angles, and so you're going to understand physics to a certain extent. Golf, yeah, right? You've got to understand why the ball does what it does when you hit it this way versus that way, etc. You got to know. If you're gonna sail, there's all sorts of stuff you got to know about how the wind works, right? So if you're gonna get wealthy and you're going to keep it, which is a whole nother topic of conversation, then you have to know how money works. And candidly, most business people do not. Right? And so those two things, the understanding and the kind of the relationship with it. There's a whole, I talk a lot about wealth intimidation, that people have been persuaded and have embedded that that even wanting it, planning to have it, demanding it of a business or a practice for exchange of value, it makes them squeamish. It's somehow, unseemly, right? But you don't get what you don't plan for. Well, if you do, it's generally stuff you don't want. And money has to feel welcome and accepted and respected, in order to move and stay in a place. So you see all the time. See, we've been trying to cure poverty with money since FDR, and really on an accelerated basis since LBJ. That's a lot of years. We have poured just awesome amounts of money into the war on poverty. And we're losing the war worse in 2023 than we were in 1998. All we've done is actually produce more and deeper poverty, because no matter how much money you give to somebody, if they have a bad relationship with money and they don't understand money, they will find a way to disgorge it. It will be taken from them, right? So like if we give people SNAP, food stamps, but we don't teach them how to intelligently shop, all the way down to simple stuff like, the convenience store at the corner accepts this, but this is not where you ought to buy your groceries, right? And here's why. Guess what? The money moves from the poor person to the rich person that owns the convenience store, right? And so, and then we build a poverty industry around this. So most of the money, of course, disappears into the industry. It doesn't even go to the poor people to start with. But we've waged the wrong war from the very beginning. If we had waged a war of education and motivation and opportunity, we would have a lot less poverty. And if you have any kind of a little poverty consciousness in here, and you can't win that war by trying to increase your income, right? So there is a mindset issue to this, and there's a practical behavioral issue, and then a practical business issue, and they all interrelate.
Right. Well, hopefully that's what we've put together for the day. I think everybody's had a sneak peek of what we're going to discuss. We're going to go through the practical elements of the business, and ultimately how we move people from insurance towards cash, and how we stop the dependency on doctors and referrals from doctors to get that level of autonomy, step outside and be that independent, successful practice. And we'll start the day with some what I suspect will be a very rousing discussion about money and the false beliefs around money and why some people have it, why they don't. And the 2 days, well, the whole weekend will take place July the 8th and 9th. If you are looking for a ticket, you want to come and spend the 2 days with me and a full day on Saturday with Dan, it's paulgough.com/Dan. And Dan, we're going to get into more of these principles at that weekend here in Cleveland.
Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for your time. We'll see you then. paulgough.com/Dan.
Thanks for watching this video, and if you found it helpful
And if you now find yourself thinking, I wonder what else this person can help me with, head over to paulgough.com/books, where you can find my best-selling books, which will show you how to add more profit to your practice. Or send an email to paul@paulgough.com to ask about how we can help you accelerate the growth and profitability of your clinic. And by the way, if you know anybody who would find this helpful, please share this video out. Thanks so much.